In this video, I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step process to remove your factory rear fender on your 2017 Honda Grom and install the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator kit. Now before we get into the step-by-step process for installing the Fender Eliminator kits, I'd just like to go over the key details of the two kits that Vagabond Motorsports makes for the new 2017 Honda Grom. So we make two because we make the first of which is for repackaging all your OEM lights and giving you the option to run aftermarket turn signals. And the second of which is going to be for integrated tail lights where you don't want any license plate light or turn signals. So our two-piece kit consists of a trim panel that's going to conceal all the holes and divots that you'll see when we take off the factory rear fender, and then what looks very much like a traditional Fender Eliminator that has all the pickup points for your factory lights. And those two pieces are going to go together to create kind of a singular unit, but it's going to be super flush underside, and that should be a really nice and a very clean appearance when it's all installed. As for hardware that's going to come with your kit, it's going to be 4 M8 nuts, black phosphate coated, mil-spec rubber grommet, and 2 stainless steel washers that we're going to use to tighten up the license plate light fit. Like all Vagabond Motorsports parts, they are CNC laser cut and bent from aluminum here in the United States, covered in a UV resistant satin black powder coat. Now if we move on to the second kit, just to give you a quick view of that, it's a slightly easier install just because there's a lot less wiring involved, but same trim piece and a very much smaller license plate mount, but the hardware you get is exactly the same, and the idea is that you still get a very flush, kind of very clean underside appearance, but the license plate is going to be tucked right up underneath the tail light. So that's for guys who want to run an integrated tail light and not deal with blinkers or an extra license plate light. Now as for tools you're going to need to complete this installation process, start off with a 12 and an 8mm socket. It'll help to have both kind of a ratcheting handle and a screwdriver style driver, but you also need a Phillips screwdriver, a 14mm open end wrench, and it's going to be very useful to have some needle nose pliers to help with the bullet connectors. For this video we're going to use a power driver with a very similar set of attachments just to make the process quicker, so if you have those, go ahead and use them. Alright, so the first step in removing the factory rear fender is going to be to remove the rider seat. And you're going to use your key and the side of the frame and just twist the latch and remove the seat. Set that aside, and we'll go about removing the wiring next. So there's one connector on the right or brake side of the frame rail that we have to get to, and it's going to have a black jacket on it, and you can kind of start kind of fishing it out. You're going to have to do two things. You're going to have to pull this kind of glossy, the rubber coated wire clip, the flexible one, up, and then you kind of have to dig it out under. It's usually under this red connector. You'll see a big shiny black rubber boot, and if you pull the boot back you'll see this white 4-pin connector, and that's going to be the connector for both your turn signals and your license plate light. So disconnect that and then start pulling the wiring loom back towards the tail section of the bike, and you'll have to separate one more kind of white serrated connector. And once you get it through there, you're ready to actually remove the rear fender from the motorcycle. So to get the factory rear fender off, you're going to take these 4 M8 bolts, and so these are 12mm heads. And the one thing that you absolutely need to be careful of is the frame tube, the subframe spars, are just open tubes at the end here. And it is so easy when you're removing these to those bolts to actually drop them down the frame tubes, and that is going to make you very sad because they'll just rattle around forever. So I highly recommend take a piece of masking tape, take a shop towel, take anything, and just kind of shove them down those two tubes and seal them off. That way, if you do get loose of that bolt, you actually don't risk dropping it down the tube. So with your 12mm socket, go ahead and remove those 4 bolts. And once you've got the 4th one, kind of grasp the fender. See, that's exactly why you want that tape there. So you grasp the rear fender, kind of pull it backwards and down, and it'll kind of pull out of a couple teeth on the underside, and set it aside on your bench, and we'll break it down. So now that you got the factory rear fender off, you can kind of see why we supply a trim plate with our Fender Eliminators. You can see, not only do you see the big 4 holes that the bolts go in, but you see all these extra kind of, you see a big like white plastic mark there, you see a big divot, and then on both right and left sides you get kind of holes, and then on the sides of the tail light in particular you get these big gaps. So our trim plate is going to fill in as much of those as we possibly can. It's going to make this install look way cleaner. So once you get your factory rear fender off the motorcycle, one thing to note is this video we're not going to cover the replacement of the license plate itself, just because every dealer kind of supplies their own hardware, and you're just going to reuse it. So in this case it's Phillips head and 10mm nut on the back. If that's the case for your install, go ahead and reuse those. We'll install a license plate at the very end of this process. Once you get to kind of this factory fender as a whole, there's 5 screws, one of which is up top here. They're Phillips head screws. We're going to use the power driver just to make this quick. But there's 5 total, and there's that one, and then there's 2, 4 on the underside. So I'm going to remove those and then pop this plastic shell off, and we'll get to the inside. So all these screws, we're not going to reuse them, so if you just kind of pop that shell off, and we'll get to the next level of detail in here. So once that shell's off, you'll see a kind of steel frame, and we're gonna have to get that out too to easily get our turn signals out. But to start this process, there's one reusable zip tie here. Just lift the tab, open it up, get that guy out of there so we can take all our wiring out. Set that aside. So what I would recommend, just because it makes the process a little easier, is there's 4 Phillips head screws that are accessible, that hold the license plate light assembly on. And if you get to it now, you'll have more access for the there's one more screw holding on this steel frame. So at this point the license plate light is ready to come off, but you're not ready to obviously it's still connected to the turn signals. So there's a single wiring loom for the whole tail section, and Honda's still seeing fit to use bullet connectors to connect these guys up. So the easiest way for bullets is to use a small set of needle nose pliers. There's no real slam dunk way to get these apart. You can pull them apart just with your hand, but you want to be careful not to pull the wire out of the bullet itself, which is actually not that difficult to do. So there's kind of 2 power and 2 ground. So obviously just match the colors up when we reinstall these guys, but green is ground and blue and yellow, or blue and orange, excuse me, are the turn signals. So with a thin set of needle nose, it actually makes it fairly easy to kind of get into the clear rubber boot, grab the bullet, and pull it out. So the license plate light actually has the master loom, where the turn signals themselves are mostly disconnected at this point. So you've got those 4 screws out, you've got your wiring loom disconnected. You flip this guy over and you'll see the license plate light is ready to come out, and it's not exactly ready to come out because you can see it's going under this cross brace. But now that you've got your license plate light off, you can see that last 5th bolt holding on that steel shell, and that's going to be a 8mm, and now that that license plate light's off, it's really easy to get to it. So go ahead and use your 8mm. You don't actually have to go and remove all your license plate hardware if you do it this way. And once that bolts out, you're free to get this big steel frame out, and it's kind of captured on these 2 little plastic pegs, so you kind of just have to yank it out, to be honest. Easier said than done, obviously. There we go. Okay. So once that steel frame's out, you are free to pull everything apart. there's no kind of absolute perfect sequence here, so if you end up starting in one place and getting the same result, it's all good. And the last, just gotta pull all the license plate light hardware or wiring loom out of that hole. The last thing you want to take out of this factory shell are going to be your two turn signals. You're going to need a 14mm open end wrench, and you can just grab on that flange nut and loosen it up. You're going to take most of the hardware from this, so keep once you get the nut off, there's going to be a washer that comes along with for the ride. So we are going to keep the flange nut and the washer. We are not going to keep this big kind of washer plate. We don't need it for the Fender Eliminator install, so you can set those aside for storage, but we are going to keep the turn signals and then the flange nut and washer for both sides. So repeat that process for both turn signals. And once you're there, you're done with your fender shell, and you can either put it back together with all the screws for storage, or just set the whole thing aside or in the trash can. The last bit of breakdown we have to do is take the license plate assembly, which is on this big spacer. You can see, I don't know what's up with that. That is so loose. So we're going to make sure that tightens up on our install, but we have to take this light out of this big plastic spacer. And again, you just need your 8mm socket. Works really well on a screwdriver style driver. We're going to reuse all this hardware, so do not toss this stuff. And by this hardware I mean these two 8mm lock nuts, which we're going to dump out right now. So we'll pull the harness out and then discuss whatever else we're keeping. Make it a little easier to see. When you're pulling these harnesses through, often it's easier if you separate the boot from what it's actually supposed to cover, because otherwise it starts getting a little too thick. So we want this whole license plate light harness. We want these two nuts, and the last couple things we're going to steal are, you can see if you kind of push on the center, you can get these kind of steel centers out, and we're going to steal this this rubber grommet kind of gasket, because that's going to work really well on the Fender Eliminator. So at this point we're ready to start assembling the Fender Eliminator with all the lights you just disassembled. So if we take the kind of the body of the Fender Eliminator, I would start with the license plate light, and you're just going to kind of push in this grommet into the two, there's kind of two kind of flange sections that will push through the right and left hole. So push them through and then straighten out the grommet. You'll see on the back side you're going to want it nice, kind of even, kind of, yeah, so kind of flatten it out. Now, the problem with reusing these steel centers just like the factory did is you'll end up with just as wobbly a license plate light, which we don't want. So the kit from Vagabond includes these two stainless steel washers, and they conveniently fit directly over those centers. So what you're going to do is put a washer over the center and then push it into the hole. So again, take that kind of steel center, put a washer over it, and then slide it through the gasket. Now all that's going to do is increase the preload on the gasket, and that's going to improve the fit, and you're not going to have a wobbly license plate light, which we don't want. So once you've got that done, start by feeding that harness with all its boots from the license plate light back through that central hole, and it will be big enough to take all those gaskets right back through it, or the boots back through it. So get that, and then you'll see there should be, that gasket should fit really well around the perimeter of that light, and if it doesn't, it may just require a little bit of kind of straightening out. But you're going to replace those two 8mm lock nuts on the studs and tighten them with your 8mm driver. Now it should still bottom out totally, so you don't have to tighten it to a special amount. Once it gets, kind of feels like the whole assembly bottoms out, you're done. And these are lock nuts, so you don't necessarily need to go overkill with these. So once you're tight, you'll see this light is now, there's a tiny bit of give in it, but it's much more kind of stout than it originally was, which is a much higher quality feel. So once the license plate light's squared away, you can reassemble your right and left turn signals. And so the Honda turn signals are a little easier to tell which one's right and left. Just for reference, that one, you'll always see the one with the screw pointed down. So in this case, the blue is the right, and the yellow conductor, obviously green is ground, but blue is right, orange is left. And you'll see on our Fender Eliminator, there actually isn't, it's not a perfectly round hole. It actually has flats in it, and that's going to key into the flats on the turn signal, so you actually don't have to try very hard to get them pointed exactly the right direction. Now, one thing to note is on our Fender Eliminator, you can, with this same hole, run any variety of aftermarket turn signals that have this kind of 10mm stud. And obviously this is for the left side, but we're not including turn signals or wiring harness adapters. But you can see actually in this scenario, a lot of them do use bullets, so you could actually just tighten them or swap pretty easily. But that'll let you really cleanly use any number of aftermarket turn signals if you like those better. So our Fender Eliminator will accommodate both OEM and aftermarket really well, but in this installation we're going to do OEM. And for that, you just thread the wiring loom through the hole, and then thread the bullet connectors through both the washer and flange nut that are both factory pieces of hardware. What you'll see is if you kind of just rotate the turn signal a little bit as you get tight, it's going to it's going to like kind of just clock perfectly into where it needs to go. And once it does that, you can tighten it up. Again, you're going to need your 14mm wrench, and there's a tiny bit of play here, so you can dial it in a little bit, but by and large, that slot is going to dictate what direction your turn signals are pointing. So we'll jam through and get the left signal on as well. Again, thread through the hole, through the washer, and then through the flange nut. That's another nice thing about our Fender Eliminator, is that with those keyed cutouts, you don't have to go do a bunch of work and say, oh, I'm perfectly horizontal, because that's already been done. So tighten it up. Both of those are going to be projecting perfectly to the rear. And nice big 14 or 10mm stud, so you can go tight on these, although there's no requirement that you really go crazy with them. So at this point, we've got the Fender Eliminator totally fully assembled, so lights in, and now we've got this issue of reconnecting wiring harnesses and threading them through a grommet. So the Fender Eliminator kit is supplied with a rubber grommet that's ultimately going to live in this kind of oval hole in the trim plate, but you can't shovel the wiring harness through there first. You have to first get this grommet over the wiring loom, and then we can go and thread it onto the trim plate. So this connector is going to be the hardest one to get it over. You do have to stretch the grommet a bit, but you can kind of roll the grommet over on itself to get it over, and that's not going to be super easy, but it's fine for the grommet, and it's just part of the process. You only have to do this once, and then you'll do the same thing, getting it through these glossy boots is also potentially a painful process, but what I would do is you can let it roll over itself, and it's not too bad. But the nice thing about this is once you get it on the motorcycle, it'll keep the wires from vibrating against a piece of metal. That'll ultimately kind of rub through the jacket and potentially cause a short. So you get it through the big tedious bundle, and then you just have to thread the turn signal connectors through it, because this is going to tie up fairly tightly to the trim plate. So once that's done, I would say go ahead and connect all your bullet connectors back up. And yeah, there's no reason why you can't do that now. And again, it's very useful to have a thin set of needle nose to help you with this part of the wiring. For bullets, you will feel like a little click when they're actually fully seated, and it's important you do that, otherwise you're just gonna have it vibrate right out. So we'll get these guys connected, and then we'll do the last bit of assembly with the trim plate. So we've got all our connectors, bullets together. You can pull this jacket over, and at this point there's one more phase to the program. So you've got your trim plate that's ultimately going to go like that, and you've got to pull this whole harness through here. So start with the connector. You will likely have to turn it sideways to get it to go through. Pull all your boots through. It actually may be easier for this part of the process to not have the full jacket over all the bullets, just because it physically makes it much larger. So if you pull the boot back separately, it'll let you get everything through. So once you've got it through, then you can pull the jacket over, or the boot over. So the last fun and games with the grommet is, now that you've got this grommet on your cable loom, you just have to shove it into this oblong hole. And that's actually not too bad. Give yourself a little slack kind of by pulling out a length of cable, and then just start going around that oval hole, and just kind of force the grommet in. And what you'll see is you'll feel it kind of pop through. And if you look on the other side, you kind of pick it up with your finger, like here. You see it's kind of caught. So go around the oval and pick it up, and once you go around, you should end up with a really clean seal. And so when these go together, obviously all this wiring needs to get pulled up. So you can start pulling this slack up, and you'll see it should be nice and snug, and that's a good thing, because what you want, you can line up those two studs in the two holes, and then finish pulling your wiring tight. And you can clean it up a tiny bit. You can see this a little bit crossed up here. There we go. So what you ultimately want is, you want your 3 connectors to go right into that grommet. You can see how clean that is, and that's going to keep these wiring looms really well protected. So at this point, all this is ready to go back on the motorcycle and complete the installation. Now, to get this whole assembled Fender Eliminator onto the motorcycle, start with the big white connector on its loom. There's a rectangular hole in the tail section of the motorcycle that you can start pulling all the wiring up. Now, the trim piece does have 2 very small teeth, and those will kind of key into those 2 big slots on the front of the motorcycle, but the most important thing is to get your studs lined up with those holes. And you can do it from above or below. Oops, I forgot there was one bolt in here still. We don't need those. So once you get your studs in, what I would recommend is there's 4 of those black flange nuts supplied in the kit, and just get them started by hand. At least a couple of the front ones, which will help you. But if you can get all 4 on while you're holding it up with the other hand, it'll really reduce the risk of you cross-threading any of these bolts, which is important. And one of the things you'll see when you lift up the Fender Eliminator is that grommet you just installed actually fills that rectangular hole very well. And once you've got, there we go. So use your 12 millimeter wrench either in a power driver like this or in a socket, and make sure everything is as it should be from a connection standpoint. And you can go and tighten up those 4 nuts. Now once the fender eliminator is in, you can see the trim plate has totally covered up all those kind of bumps and holes, and it kind of has those little wings that fold up on both the right and left sides, and that also help cover up some of the gaps on the other sides of the right and left sides of the tail light. So hopefully a much cleaner final installation than a lot of the other kits will give you. And just a quick note for those of you who are interested in the integrated tail light side of things, this kind of simple license plate mount is going to replace that second piece, the one that currently has all the turn signals and license plate light in it. So this will put the license plate a little bit higher and a little bit further back. You'll still have use of that grommet if you actually want to run your own license plate lights, those kind of license plate bolts that double as lights, just because we don't make provisions for a license plate light in this part of the kit. But otherwise exactly the same installation process. You'll have to wire up your integrated tail light, obviously, but it's going to reuse or use those same nuts on the top side that the kind of OEM grade Fender Eliminator does. So once you've got the Fender Eliminator installed with those 4 flange nuts, you can remove the tape that you put on the subframe and you can finish up the wire routing. Now because you've got a little extra length here, I wouldn't recommend that you try to jam all 3 of these looms through that. So I would close this white clip connector, and I would try to package as much of the kind of extra bundle in this right side panel. So start back by the tail light, and you can get all 3 of these looms through the wire guides that are kind of here and here. And then at this point, let's make sure this boot's actually doing what it's supposed to do. I would start by making the connection for your 4-pin connector. So let's connect that guy, and let's get the boot for him over in the right area. So once you've got that, I mean, it's mostly just an issue of kind of backtracking, and so you can shove that glossy black connector with the 2-pin license plate light or a 4-pin license plate light and turn signal connector back. You can close this guy, and then what I truly would recommend is to make this service loop and tuck it into the side panel. You can reuse actually a bit of this kind of flexi connector to hold one end of the loop, but what you should end up with is something that you're fairly confident is not going to rub on the seat, and it's not going to rub any wires through. So as you see that, that's actually a really solid wire routing, and I wouldn't be concerned that that's going to give you any problems. Now once the wiring is all done, all you got to do is put the rider seat back on. So you just have to hook that little tooth into that loop and slide the seat forward, and there we go. Push it down the rear to latch it. So once you got the seat on and all the wiring done, it's always a good idea to do a quick systems check. We've got our plate on. Obviously, you reuse your factory hardware for the plate. So got really good uniform license plate illumination. Double check that your blinkers for the right and the left still work. And at that point, you're all done with the installation. Now that we've got the installation all squared away, give you guys a couple more kind of walk around views of the Fender Eliminator and its completed install. You can see a lot of the gaps that are opened up by the factory rear fenders removal are totally sealed back up, and then some with the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator. One of the things you'll see on the new Grom, which is kind of interesting, is we try to cover it as much as possible because the underside of the Grom has this big bump in it, and so now from profile with this kit you won't be able to see any of it, so it's kind of totally disguised. Thank you for watching this video. Our products can be purchased directly on our website, www.vagabondmotorsports.com, as well as Prime on Amazon and eBay. Thank you very much.